The night was cold and dark, the kind that makes you shiver even under the thickest blankets. In a small village in medieval England, a young woman named Alice Skeuington stood at the window, her heart pounding. She had just overheard a conversation that would change her life forever. Her father, William Skeuington, was talking with a man named Floyd. Alice couldn't see them, but she could hear every word. Floyd was asking for her hand in marriage. Alice had always known her father would choose who she would marry, but she had never imagined it would be Floyd. She didn't hate him, but she didn't love him either. Her heart belonged to someone else, a man named John Spence. As she listened, her father's voice grew loud and angry. "No, I will not give my consent," he shouted. Alice's heart sank. She knew her father's word was law, and she would have to marry Floyd whether she wanted to or not. But then, something unexpected happened. A few weeks later, her father's tone had changed. He had given his consent to the marriage. Alice couldn't understand why. Had Floyd done something to persuade him, or was there another reason? Confused and scared, Alice confided in her uncle. He suggested that Floyd might need her father's permission to marry her. Alice didn't know what to think. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage. Floyd, aware of the situation, decided to take matters into his own hands. He appointed a lawyer named Thomas, both to help him. Both petitioned the court to have Alice sequestered, which meant she would be placed in the care of a trusted family. Floyd hoped this would give him control over her as her husband. The court, however, was suspicious and ordered Alice to stay with Robert and Johanna Croft, a couple known for their honesty. The judge wanted to protect Alice, sensing that she might be in danger. Alice was also asked to give her side of the story. She confirmed that she had spoken the words of marriage to Spence, but no one had witnessed their exchange. This was a huge problem for both Alice and Spence, as the lack of witnesses made their claims weak. Meanwhile, John Spence appeared in court, alleging that he had married Alice. He claimed that they had exchanged vows on the previous Easter Sunday, but no one else had been present. The judge, eager to uncover the truth, questioned Alice again. She confirmed the words spoken to Spence, but admitted that no one had witnessed their exchange. The case became more complicated when Alice's uncle's involvement was revealed. Alice had asked her uncle to speak to her father about Floyd, which raised more questions. Had she truly wanted to marry Floyd, or was she trying to get out of the marriage to be with Spence? The judge adjourned the case, giving Floyd time to answer certain questions. Alice appointed 3 lawyers to represent her, hoping they could find a way to prove her case. But the lack of witnesses and the uncertainty surrounding her father's change of heart made it difficult. In another part of the country, a similar drama was unfolding. Christina Sulby found herself caught between 2 men, John Kellett and Thomas Clarke. Kellett claimed they had a private contract, while Clarke alleged he had a prior claim. Kellett, determined to marry Christina, obtained a papal dispensation, which allowed them to bypass the usual procedures. They were married in Clapham, but the court case was still ongoing. The court, known for its strict and thorough approach, would have to decide the fate of both Alice and Christina. The young women, though different in their situations, shared a common goal: to make their own choices and leave the lives they desired. The night was still cold, and Alice lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future held. She knew that the next few days would be crucial. Whatever the outcome, her life would never be the same again. In the world of medieval marriage, the rules and practices were complex and often intertwined with the church. Scholars like Christopher N. L. Brooke and Georges Duby laid the groundwork for understanding these customs, but the story didn't stop there. Over the years, researchers have delved deeper into the lives of people during this time, uncovering fascinating details about how marriage worked. One of the key figures in this research is J.P. Goldberg. In his book, Women, Work and Life Cycle in a Medieval Economy, Goldberg shows that medieval women had more control over their lives than previously thought. They could choose their jobs, and sometimes whether they wanted to get married at all. This idea challenges the common belief that women had no say in their lives. David Davray, in Medieval Marriage, Symbolism and Society, looks at the religious side of marriage. He argues that the church's teachings on marriage, which were often shared through sermons, had a big impact on both society and the law. The church saw marriage as a sacred bond, and this belief influenced how people thought about and treated marriage. Connor McCarthy's book, Marriage in Medieval England, explores the legal and literary aspects of marriage. He shows how the laws and stories of the time reflect the complex nature of marriage, including the roles of men and women and the importance of the church. Eric Joseph Carlson's Marriage and the English Reformation focuses on how marriage laws changed during the Reformation. He argues that by the time of the Reformation, most people in England were comfortable with the existing marriage laws and didn't want major changes, unlike in other parts of Europe. Ralph Howellbrook's Church Courts and the People During the English Reformation provides a detailed look at how church courts handled marriage cases. He shows that these courts played a crucial role in resolving disputes and enforcing marriage laws. R. H. Helmholtz's The Canon Law and Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction from 597 to the 1640s is a comprehensive guide to the laws that governed marriage in medieval times. His earlier book, Marriage Litigation in Medieval England, focuses on the actual court cases and how they were handled. R. B. Outwaite's Clandestine Marriage in England, 1500 to 1850, explores the practice of secret marriages, which were often controversial. Charles Donohue's Law, Marriage, and Society in the Later Middle Ages examines marriage cases from different courts across Europe, providing a broader perspective on how marriage was handled. The York Cause Papers, a collection of court records, offer a rich source of information about marriage cases. J.P. Goldberg and Simon J. Harris have written extensively about these papers, showing how they can be used to understand the social history of the time. Helmholtz's Marriage Litigation and other works by scholars like Richard Wonderly and Shannon McSheffrey provide detailed insights into how marriage cases were handled in different parts of England, such as York, Canterbury, and London. Martin Ingram's research on marriage litigation from the 14th to the 17th centuries further enriches our understanding of these cases. However, not all regions have been studied equally. For example, the Diocese of Lincoln has received less attention. Margaret Boker's edition of an Episcopal court book for the Diocese of Lincoln, which contains 17 marriage cases, is one of the few sources for this region. Other valuable sources include E. M. Elvey's edition of the Courts of the Archdeaconry of Buckingham and a Hamilton Thompson's work on visitations in the Diocese of Lincoln. Lawrence R. Pooz's Lower Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction in Late Medieval England includes several 14th century cases from Lincoln, and there are also unpublished manuscript sources that provide more information. One interesting case involves a woman named Alice, who was married to John Floyd. The court records show that Alice and John had a contentious relationship. John accused Alice of not being a good wife, and the court had to intervene. The court ordered Alice to be separated from John and placed in a safe house, where she was not allowed to leave until the matter was resolved. Another case involving Johann Spence illustrates the complexity of marriage laws. Spence accused his wife of not being a valid wife because of a technicality in the marriage contract. The court had to carefully examine the details to determine if the marriage was valid. These cases, and many others, show that medieval marriage was not just a simple union between two people. It was a complex legal and social institution, deeply influenced by the church and the laws of the time. Understanding these cases helps us see the real lives of people in the Middle Ages, including the challenges they faced and the decisions they made. In the years following the Spanish conquest of Mexico, the Franciscan friars, or papas, as the Nahua often called them, faced significant challenges in converting the indigenous population to Christianity. One of the primary issues was that the Nahua people, who had their own deeply ingrained religious practices, found traditional sermons boring and ineffective. To overcome this, the friars began using methods that were more engaging and culturally familiar to the Nahua, such as drama and song. Religious drama, including passion plays and morality plays, became a crucial tool for the friars. These plays were not only more engaging, but also helped to replace the elaborate ceremonies and festivals that were central to Nahua religious life. The plays were performed in Nahuatl, the native language, and featured actors from the local community. This made the performances more relatable and effective in conveying the Christian message. One of the morality plays that highlight the challenges of conversion is The Nobleman and His Barren Wife. In this play, the female protagonist, referred to as woman and later as barren one, refuses to give her husband children and also attempts to stop him from donating their money to the church and the poor. Her actions are presented as sinful and against the teachings of the church. The play uses the Virgin Mary as a model of the ideal woman, contrasting her virtues with the sinful behavior of the barren one. Another play, Final Judgment, focuses on a single woman named Lucia. Lucia refuses to marry and engages in various sexual relationships, which are portrayed as sinful. The play graphically shows the consequences of her actions, including her punishment in the afterlife. Both The Nobleman and His Barren Wife and Final Judgment use vivid and often frightening imagery to scare the audience into adhering to Christian moral teachings. To understand the significance of these plays, it is important to consider the role of women in Nahua culture. According to the Florentine Codex, a comprehensive work compiled by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, Nahua society had different expectations for women compared to Christian standards. Women in Nahua culture had more freedom and were not bound by the same strict moral codes as those imposed by the church. For example, premarital and extramarital sexual relations were more accepted in Nahua culture. The morality plays reflected the friars' efforts to curb what they saw as womanly sin in the Nahua population. However, it is not clear whether the sexual behavior of the female protagonists in these plays was problematic only for the church, or if it was also frowned upon by the Nahua. The plays may have been more effective in reinforcing Christian values among the new converts, as they used familiar cultural elements to make the message more relatable. There is ongoing debate about the authorship of these morality plays. Some scholars, like Louise Burkhardt, argue that the plays were written by the Nahua themselves, possibly as a form of resistance against the friars. However, others, like Fernando Cervantes, suggest that the friars were more likely to have written the plays, as they would have approved and directed the performances. The plays often included native practices and ideas, suggesting a syncretic approach to conversion, where elements of Nahua culture were integrated into Christian teachings. The morality plays were performed on Sundays during Lent to encourage the Nahua to participate in the Catholic sacrament of penitence. The plays stressed the importance of confession and used graphic representations of sin and punishment to frighten the audience into adhering to Christian moral teachings. Despite the efforts of the friars, there were always tensions within the church regarding the methods used in conversion. Some officials were concerned about the unorthodox nature of the plays and the potential for syncretism, where native and Christian elements were mixed. The morality plays of early colonial Mexico were a significant tool in the conversion efforts of the Franciscan friars. By using drama and native language, the friars made their teachings more engaging and relatable to the Nahua population. However, the plays also reflected the conflict between Nahua and Christian values, particularly in the role of women. The authorship and content of these plays continue to be a subject of scholarly debate, highlighting the complex and often syncretic nature of the conversion process. In the land of New Spain, the conversion journey of the Nahuas, the native people, was a complex mix of acceptance and resistance. While some Nahua converts were as strict about heretical practices as the friars, others found the new Christian teachings hard to swallow. Friars like Sahagún and Modelinho worked tirelessly to teach the Nahuas about the new faith, but they often faced challenges, especially when it came to women's behavior. One of the most striking examples of the friars' teachings is a sermon by Sahagún, delivered in Nahuatl, the language of the Nahuas. In this sermon, Sahagún addresses unmarried women who have been sexually active. Since there was no word for virgin or virginity in Nahuatl, he uses the terms girl and girlhood instead. Sahagún paints a vivid and harsh picture to emphasize the importance of chastity. You lost the grace of God, you placed yourself in sin, you pushed away your guardian angel. Already the Tilaka Tekalotl, the devil, carries you about. When you were still a girl, you pertained to the girls, now you already pertain to the promiscuous women. When you were still a girl, your heart knew that it was gold, precious, but now it is like a chamber pot. When you were still a girl, you were equal to a very good, very fragrant flower. Now you are just equal to filth. God's possession, which he gave you, your girlhood, you gave to the devil. Oh, how wretched you are. This imagery might seem extreme, but it had a specific purpose. The Nahuas did not share the Christian concept of heaven and hell, which depended on one's behavior in life. Instead, their afterlife was determined by the nature of their death. Therefore, Sahagun uses the heart, a vital and ruling part of the body in Nahua culture, to convey the importance of spiritual purity. The comparison to a chamber pot, while shocking, was not entirely foreign to the Nahuas. In their culture, excrement often symbolized carnal misbehavior, and promiscuous women were often described using terms related to body waste. The concept of a fragrant flower also had a different meaning in Nahua culture. Flowers were symbols of potency, fertility, and reproduction, not just beauty. Tlazolteotl, a goddess whose name can be translated as goddess of filth, or divine excrement, was associated with both filth and purification. This duality suggests that the Nahuas had their own complex views on sexuality and purity, even if they did not have a direct equivalent to the Christian concept of virginity. Despite these differences, the Nahuas did have some shared ideals about female sexuality. Premarital sex was generally frowned upon, and women, especially those of noble birth, were expected to remain pure for their husbands. The importance of marriage and family was emphasized, and the inability to have children was seen as a significant social and personal tragedy. This is evident in the play, The Nobleman and His Barren Wife, which highlights the conflict between Christian and Nahua values. The play begins with a stark contrast between the nobleman and his wife. The nobleman is described as deeply pious, loving God, and willing to endure poverty for his faith. His wife, on the other hand, is portrayed as a barrier to his piety, trying to lead him away from his duties. God, represented as an angry and vengeful figure, has made her barren as a punishment for her lack of faith. The nobleman's piety is further demonstrated when he welcomes Christ, disguised as a priest, into his home. This scene is rich with didactic elements, reinforcing the importance of hospitality and faith. The nobleman's willingness to do penance and his concern for his soul stand in stark contrast to his wife's materialistic and skeptical views. As the play progresses, the nobleman expresses his deep sorrow over their childless state, seeing it as a divine punishment. He suggests they give away their wealth to the poor and the church, a clear Christian ideal. However, his wife is resistant, valuing their current comfort and wealth over spiritual salvation. This conflict reflects the broader tension between the Christian focus on the afterlife and the Nahua emphasis on the present. The play also features a scene with demons, who discuss their success in leading people to hell despite their attendance at church. This reflects the friars' belief that the Nahuas were vulnerable to demonic influence and needed constant guidance. The demons' ability to distract people from their faith underscores the importance of sincere and continuous penance, a concept the Nahuas initially struggled to understand. The nobleman's understanding of sin and the importance of confession stands in contrast to his wife's ignorance. The Nahuas had no concept of sin as a matter of intent. Their form of confession dealt primarily with sexual and drunken behaviors. This lack of understanding highlights the significant cultural and religious gap the friars had to bridge. In the end, the play serves as a powerful tool for teaching the Nahuas about the importance of faith, charity, and the dangers of sin. It reflects the friars' efforts to blend Christian teachings with Nahua values, creating a new synthesis of beliefs that could guide the Nahuas through the challenges of the colonial era. As the story unfolds, we see the devil, known here as temptation, moving among people, causing confusion and harm. He takes particular pleasure in making women barren, leading to suffering and even death during childbirth. One of his targets is a noblewoman who, despite being married for 22 years, remains childless. This woman, deeply under the devil's influence, has never made a full confession, hiding her sins out of shame. Her selfishness and vanity have led her to despise children, and she is firmly in the devil's grasp. In another play, Final Judgment, we meet Lucia, an unmarried and sexually active woman. When the end of the world arrives, she tries to confess her sins, but her sins are too grave, and her rejection of marriage seals her fate. Christ in this play is unforgiving and harsh, reflecting a more terrifying version of a deity, similar to the Aztec gods who demanded human sacrifices. This portrayal may have been a way for the friars to emphasize the seriousness of sin, to a people more accustomed to viewing transgressions as punishable in this life rather than the afterlife. Christ, in his judgment, asks Lucia if she fulfilled his command to marry and live chastely. When she admits she did not, he rejects her, condemning her to hell. The demons who serve Christ eagerly await her punishment, ready to torment her for eternity. This depiction of a wrathful Christ might have been intended to instill fear and reinforce the new faith's teachings. In The Nobleman and His Barren Wife, the noblewoman's barrenness is a result of her sins and her refusal to confess. She is shown gossiping about her husband, revealing her pride and lack of faith. Her disdain for children is clear, and she sees them as a nuisance. Her behavior is contrasted with the piety of her husband, who, even when gravely ill, makes a full confession and is granted entry to heaven after a brief stay in purgatory. The noblewoman, now called Barren One, is condemned to hell. Her punishment is vivid and physical, with snakes symbolizing her vanity and her hatred of children. The priest, trying to offer her a last chance, asks her about her torment, and she explains that her luxurious earthly possessions have turned into instruments of torture. She warns others to learn from her mistakes, emphasizing the importance of honest confession and penance. The play ends with a discussion between the Virgin Mary and Christ. Mary, the perfect mother, pleads for the nobleman to be released from purgatory, and Christ agrees, showing that even the most virtuous souls face some form of purification before entering heaven. This final scene reinforces the message that the path to salvation is not easy, and that the fear of hell is a powerful motivator. The play reflects the friars' efforts to teach the Nahua people about the Christian faith, using fear and vivid imagery to convey the consequences of sin. The noblewoman's story serves as a cautionary tale, warning against vanity, pride, and the rejection of God's commands. It also highlights the importance of confession and the role of the Church in guiding souls to salvation. For the Nahua audience, the play would have reinforced the values of humility, piety, and the sanctity of motherhood, which were already important in their culture.